Howdy, Taylor Marshall here. I'm really excited about today's expert interview. We have with us Dave Palmer. Dave is the face of the Guadalupe radio network here in North Texas. So if you live in Texas, you probably hear him on the radio all the time. He's going to talk to us about how he's read the Summa 3 times. He's plowed through it, he's had the perseverance, and I met him about 5 years ago in a graduate course. And we're going to talk about how you might be able to start reading the entire Summa and fulfill that goal. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Never thought I'd be sitting in this chair. I didn't think I was qualified.
Yeah, that's right.
You got to read it like 5 or 6 times, right?
No, you're an expert. You've read it. Now, a lot of people in the forums have been talking about making a plan to read the entire Summa. And I mean, it's a big work, right? And you actually had that dream, that goal, and you've done it several times. How did you get inspired to read the entire Summa Theologiae of Thomas?
Well, I'll start off by saying it's impossible to do if you don't love it.
Right.
You know, if you start reading it and it isn't just a passion of yours, then you're never going to get through it because it's too much work. But I don't know. There came a time about 5 years ago where, after many years of really being intrigued with Thomas and kind of being intimidated in reading the Summa, it's like a light went on, and I said to myself, I am going to read the Summa. I'm going to read it from front to end. And I honestly have never met anybody that's done it. I don't know if you've done it.
No, I've never done it front to end. I haven't.
And again, I'm not...
So you started at part 1, question 1, article 1, and just went nonstop. You never skipped around.
And when I went to the Catholic bookstore to buy it, I told the lady, Janet, from Sacred Heart Books here in Dallas, I told her, I said, Janet, I'm going to read it. You know, anybody who knows the Summa, it's 5 volumes, it's really big. And she kind of laughed. And I said, no, really, I really am. And I guess I had to convince myself.
Yeah, that's great.
I guess I just got into it. You know, it's like anything you love. And the funny thing is that it took me 9 months to read the first time. I highlighted the whole thing. Because that's how we're
literally you highlighted it.
I highlighted the whole thing.
So if I had your copy right now,
the whole thing
is highlighted. And why did you do that?
I did it because it forced me to read a little slower, and also to guarantee myself that I've read the whole thing. Because as I'm highlighting it, I know I've read it, and also I knew where I was.
Yeah.
You know, where did the highlighting stop? And so that took 9 months.
How many highlighters is that? Did you keep count?
No.
How many highlighters to get through the Summa?
I'm not sure, but probably about 10. To go through the whole thing.
All the same color?
Yeah, it's all yellow.
Okay.
I thought about the second time doing, pink or blue or second. 9 months took me the first time. I ended, I forget the date, but I ended one night. The next day I started it again. I mean, I wasn't like, well, let's take a couple months off. I was like, so then I went through with a red pen and highlighted the most important parts, underlined, and I went through the whole thing with a red pen, and that took about a year. And so then after that, I said, I'm going to go through and just read the corpuses, corpi, the body of the.
Good.
And so went through and read all the corpuses. By that time, I realized, that's really the most important part of each article. But it was a blast. I enjoyed every minute of it.
So there's people watching right now thinking, okay, I could do this. I'm going to do it. They're fired up, right? Was there a moment when you're in the first part and you're like, oh, I'm not going to finish? Or, I mean, is there kind of like when you're reading the Bible, you read Genesis, Exodus, you get to Leviticus, and you just start kind of skidding and having problems? Is there a part in the Summa where you kind of get into some rough terrain?
I would say the part where it talks about the Old Testament laws, ceremonial laws, and
that's like my favorite part.
The precepts, because the articles are
they get big,
are real long, and. That I got to admit, that's your favorite part.
I love that part.
It wasn't my favorite part. And also, sometimes I was trying to read, like, let's say, a couple questions a day, and when you get to those parts where instead of having, 3 articles, you've got, 10, and instead of having 3 objections, you've got, 15, or instead of it being, the article being a page and a half, it's 10 pages.
Right.
Then it's like, oh my gosh, But but I still enjoyed it, and. But that wasn't my favorite part. Fortunately, the first part is my favorite part.
The first part is?
Interesting. Yeah, Prima Pars is my favorite part of the Summa.
It's the most kind of philosophical.
Because I've always been fascinated with the how we epistemology. How
Yeah.
do we know things? How does God, what is His intellect like? Does God have a will? Predestination.
Yeah, yeah.
The body soul composite. The
Right.
angels.
The angels is a beautiful part of that.
Yeah, and I just thought, all of creation, kind of putting it all together. How do we relate to the dogs and the angels and God? And so, yeah, so the first part, by the time I moved through that, man, I was flying and
Yeah.
nothing was going to slow me down.
Wow. For me, when people ask, I want to start reading the Summa, I usually tell them, and you can disagree, I say start with the third part because it's about Christ and his life and the sacraments, and most people can connect with that, I think, maybe more easily. Would you encourage them to just plow right into first part?
Well, one of my heroes, Taylor Marshall, on this very site, told me that it builds up to Christ,
Yeah.
and so I kind of like it that way. I like, first of all, learning about the Trinity before you get into Christ. And so I remember you saying that in one of your introductory sessions, is that, and I always found it intriguing that, Thomas didn't start with Christ, or
Right.
you got to get through three-quarters of the Summa
Yeah,
before
just to
he
get there.
really digs into it. So it intrigued me so much that I wanted to know. I took it very, very systematically.
Yeah.
And I figured,
That's good.
because he wrote it, of course, very intentionally and so
Of course.
kind of out of respect for Thomas,
Yeah.
I said I'm going to read it in order, and I'm glad I did. But now, I don't know. I guess everybody has their different ways
Right.
of reading it, but
Yeah, in the previous course, we talked about the crescendo or the climax of the Summa, moving towards Christ. And Thomas did write it that way. There's a purpose. That's the dessert, and you work through the meal along the way. So for people, start at the beginning. And what about if they meet a part where they're confused? They give up. What did you do when you got to maybe some philosophical concepts, or he's referring to Averroes or obscure personalities he didn't know? Did you go and
Yeah.
look them up, or did you just keep going?
The first time I made a promise to myself that I was just going to plow through it.
Right.
And of course, I didn't understand everything I read. Of course, there were times when I got stuck. But if I stopped down and did the research and went to the library, and I just knew I wasn't going to finish.
You would never finish.
And so, but I knew I was going to do it again. I mean, when I knew early on that I was going to read it multiple times. I just knew. I knew that I knew that I knew.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to find out about that. You're just sitting at home one day and you say, I want to read the whole Summa. What inspired you to go to the store, buy the 5 volumes,
Okay.
and get the highlighters?
I'll give you because this is a very precise answer. I work in Catholic radio, and I love the faith. I love the fullness of the faith. I want to know, like, in its entirety, everything.
Yes.
So I had read
Summa.
through.
You need a
Yeah,
Summa.
I wanted the Summa,
Yeah.
and I read through the Catechism. And the Catechism is great for getting the answers, kind of like the answers. But I wanted to know kind of from whence the answers came.
You wanted the hows and the whys.
Hows and the whys. And also, I was in a situation where when you work in Catholic radio, everybody sends you books.
Yeah.
So they give you books, and that's great. And so I would read a book, and I'd read about 2 chapters of it, and then somebody else would send me a book, and I'd say, okay, and put that one down because I'm interested in this one.
Right.
And finally, I got so frustrated with doing that I said, I want to read the best book, and of course, Scripture is the best
Of
book.
course.
Okay, and I had done this. I'd read through Scripture. But I said, I just want to really get into one thing. So
Yes.
I narrowed it down to I'm either going to read Augustine or Aquinas,
Good.
because they're really the 2 great doctors.
Of course.
But Augustine doesn't have, a Summa. Augustine wrote a lot.
He wrote a lot.
And I've read the Confessions, but I said, and plus I also realized that if I read Aquinas, I get Augustine.
That's right. You get a 2 for 1.
Yeah, and if I read, Aquinas, I get all, because he came many centuries later.
Yeah.
I'm going to get Augustine. You get a lot
Yeah.
of them.
And a lot of church fathers.
Yeah, you get a lot of church fathers, Damascene, and you get Aristotle, and you get Plato, and you get some of the Jewish philosophers, and even some of the Muslim ones.
That's right.
And so that's what it was. I said, I want one book, and I want something that, when something else comes, it's not going to distract me. Now, again,
Yeah.
Scripture is more important than the Summa.
Yes.
But not to, I want to get that out
Right.
away. But no, nothing was going to distract me because I felt like I had the gold mine,
Right.
And in listening to Catholic radio, people are constantly quoting Aquinas. And I'm thinking, okay, 800 years later, this guy's still in authority.
Yeah.
And as you have said many times, the popes and so many leaders in the church they're constantly going back to Aquinas.
Yep.
And then thinking, okay, I can't go wrong here.
Right. Wow. So, you've gone through it. Do you recommend? Some people have a hard time with the objections and the reply to the objections. So, Thomas sets it up there: the objections to his argument, then his argument and his response, and then the reply to the objections. A lot of people say, it's hard for me to remember the objections. By the time I get to the reply, it's a sandwich, and I can't remember the first part of the sandwich, and they get confused.
Right.
Did you read it systematically in order? And is there a tip you have for people to, if they're having trouble remembering how the reply to the objections map up with the objections in the Summa?
Yeah, well, the first time, of course, like I said, I was real strict about how I was reading it. So I read it straight through. I read the objections and then the ad contra and the corpus and then the response to the objections. But when I got through into the second time, I did mess with the order a little bit.
Yeah.
And when I read one objection, I would typically like to read the corpus first.
Yes.
Okay, I like to, what does Thomas say? What's the right answer? Before I read the wrong answers.
Yes.
Read the corpus, and the ad contra and the corpus, because the ad contra is normally pretty short.
Yep.
And then I'll go objection 1, response 1, objection 2.
I like to do that
2.
also.
Yeah, because it is, they get a little jumbled. And by the time, especially if you've been through the corpus and then you get into the response, you're thinking like, okay, I don't remember exactly what the objection was.
Right.
But yeah, so I started. I hope that's not cheating, but I started doing
No,
that.
I think, because we living in the third millennium, we have a very discursive or sequential way of thinking. We watch movies, and plots, and it seems that Thomas, when he's writing this, he has more of an actual debate in mind. So he has one voice and a second voice, and they're in dialogue with each other in every single article, right? And so for us that don't live in that context, I think as you're reading it in order, it kind of causes a little bit of confusion. So, for people who are trying to read the Summa, if they're having that problem, I guess our advice would be, a lot of people do, just keep at it.
Yeah, and I would say don't be too hard on yourself. Like I said, the first time I read through it, I put no, rules, nothing where I've got to understand this. If I didn't stop at every speed bump, and just have fun with it. I think once you've read through the whole thing, and again, I mean, not everybody that is with the Institute is going to do that. It's tough and it's time consuming.
Yeah.
But I think once you've read through the whole thing, you just get a really great idea of the wholeness of it. I did a paper one time on Aquinas on abortion, and so I knew that he didn't tackle that straight on. He never had any question about abortion, but he did in some parts of it obliquely get to it. But you get an idea if somebody were to say, "Hey, did Thomas ever talk about this?" Well, if you kind of read the whole thing, at least in the back of your mind, well, yeah, he did mention that, but I don't know exactly where it is. But,
you've got to find that one.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, we're going to take a break here, and we're going to come back. We're going to talk about how you can apply the Summa in your daily life and with your family, with your friends, your coworkers. Dave has some advice on that, especially as you're teaching your kids to have a more Christian, a more Catholic worldview, and using Thomas to help out for that. So thanks a lot, Dave.
All right.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment.